Welcome to One Cool Story, Tales from the University of Oregon School of Journalism and Communication. I'm your host, Julia Bobach. In this episode, fourth-year journalism major Ethan Donahue speaks with Austin Ota, a broadcast journalism alum from the class of 2025. He walks through his journey from his first campus visit to his work with KWVA Sports and now his freelance work as a sports commentator for Menlo College, West Valley College, and Stanford University. Plus, one truly cool story that starts in a Waffle House and ends in an NFL stadium.
Hi, Austin. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited for this.
We're really excited to have you on the podcast. How about you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself that our listeners might not know?
Yeah, so I am a SOJC graduate in the class of 2025. I was a sports broadcaster at KWVA, the KWVA Eugene 88.1 FM and KOCR Oak Ridge 91.5 FM, the student radio station at the U of O. And I worked there for all my 4 years, like literally from the day I started at Oregon until I graduated. I was the head director my senior year, and I worked as the assistant director my sophomore and junior years. I also had a couple other internships around campus, but yeah, SOJC graduate, and I am currently a play-by-play broadcaster and sports information director at a junior college here in the Bay Area.
Awesome. So I thought we could start our conversation with your introduction to broadcasting and journalism. How did you kind of figure out that's a path you wanted to go down, and why did you choose to come to the SOJC?
Yeah, so I grew up in the Bay Area. I grew up in San Jose, lived in the same house for 23 years. And I grew up in San Jose, but I went to school in Cupertino, which is like literally the heart of Silicon Valley. My middle, elementary, and high school campuses are all within like a 5-minute drive of the Apple HQ. And so like everyone at my school was either like an Apple employee's child or a Google employee's child or Amazon, or they worked in the cloud. You know, it was a very academic powerhouse. And I was like, okay, like I was like a fine student in high school, especially. I was like kind of mediocre, middle school, whatever, you know. My mom is a teacher, so it was like she knew all the people in the district, but I wasn't like a great student by any means, especially when you compare it to the rest of my high school. My best friend for my entire life, who still to this day is, but he at one point told me in my junior year, I had like a 3.5-ish GPA. Like I wasn't a great, I was a good average, above average student. But he told me at one point that with a 3.5 GPA, I wasn't going to college. So I was like, okay, like that's crazy, but I kind of use that as fuel a little bit. But that's kind of my academic background. And then I grew up doing theater. I started when I was 6, and I did over like, I want to say over 25 to 30 musicals. And then I also played baseball from when I was 7 through high school. We were really bad, like kind of historically bad. My high school baseball team, we didn't win a league game my 2 years on varsity and then the 2 years after me. So like, you know, there were people that went to school without seeing a varsity baseball win. There were like 11,000 or 1,143 teams in the state of California or something like that. And we were like 1139. So it was really bad. It was ugly. But all that to say, I grew up loving sports. You know, I kind of felt like I was like made to be in the sports realm. My dad, his initials are BSO, which he said were ball strikes outs. My parents' first date was at a Giants game. We kind of joked that I was like born at a baseball field, all those little things, you know, all those cliches. But I loved the performing aspect of theater and performing arts, and I really wanted to keep that going. And so when I was younger, I listened to the Giants a lot, and their radio and TV broadcast team, I really do think is like the best in pro sports. And they were just so charismatic and so funny and so unscripted, which I loved. I loved that there was something that you could do that was sports and storytelling. So I wanted to combine those things. And I was like, all right, cool. I'm going to be a broadcaster. And so we actually have like, I was looking at it this morning in my room. I have like a cutout, not like a cardboard cutout, but it's like a paper cutout of one of the Giants broadcasters' heads. Because I was a broadcaster for Halloween one year, and my dad like cut out like a refrigerator box and he made a TV and we covered it in a trash bag. And we didn't have a second person to do the broadcast with me, and it wasn't obvious by myself who I was. And so we had like a popsicle stick and this like paper cutout of the other
That's
broadcaster. And that was
awesome.
my Halloween costume. It was great. I loved it. Anyways, I've wanted to be a broadcaster forever. When I started applying to schools, it was like all of your traditional like whatever the US College Today websites are that are like these are your top 5 college journalism programs. So it was like Emerson, Ball State, but I was looking into a lot of the bigger journalism programs, and I remembered my mom had told me from when I was really little, like we have this running joke where anytime someone brings up anything remotely close to the state of Vermont, she's like, "Did you know I went to UVM?" And so we would always joke about that. But then she would talk about how like she just kind of knew when she got on the UVM campus that it was the one for her. And so we had toured a bunch of college campuses, and I was like all right with some of them. Nothing really spoke to me. And then I remember so vividly the feeling of getting onto the UO campus for the first time and being like, "Oh yeah, this is it. This is the one. This is where I want to spend my time." I saw someone like sprawled out in on the EMU green, and I was like, "Yeah, this is so cool. Like this is exactly what I want to be doing." And I don't know. I remember thinking that I wanted something that looked like Monsters U, and it did. And like in my mind, that was like that's what Monsters U looks like. And so that was that. And then once I got there, I told myself that I was going to say yes to everything that I did. And on my first day of school, Knight Uretsky, who was the assistant director and head director before me at the station, I saw him tabling outside the EMU, and he's very hard to miss. He has bright, like Weasley red hair and a very big, bright beard. And he was like, "Well, do you like sports?" And I was like, "Yeah, I like sports." And he was tabling for KWVA. And so I went to the first meeting, and the rest is history. And yeah, I mean, it's just like I'm still very young in my career, but I'm like kind of living my dream right now, which is awesome to say.
Yeah, that's an awesome thing to hear. How did the SOJC kind of prepare you to get to that point in your life?
Yeah, so I think early in my time at the SOJC, there was a lot of confusion of like what I wanted to do in terms of SOJC courses. And then Joey McMurray, who is like one of my biggest mentors, he's the director of broadcasting at the U of O. He basically like told me like, "Hey, this is gonna help you." And I was like, "Okay, like I feel like that's what every SOJC class has told me to this point is like this is going to help me." And to that point, I really I hadn't really done any SOJC classes, but I was like your average 19-year-old that was like, "What is the point of this? Like I hate college." So I took the starting broadcast classes, and I didn't really realize it in the moment just how much it was going to impact me after, because a lot of the things we do or a lot of the things that we did in class were like news related, and I'd known literally since I was like 8 that I wanted to work in sports. And again, I kind of reverted back to like this is stupid, like I don't want to do this. And Joey and Jess Altman, who was the other professor in that class, were like, "All right, like push through this, like you're kind of good at this." And I was like, "I don't think I am, and I'm not having fun doing it." And then it got to the point where I was like, we were working in the Adobe suite, and I just had no idea what I was doing. And I was like, "Okay, maybe I'm not going to do news, but I have a feeling that this is going to help me that like knowing this is going to help me at some point." So I, sat and talked with Joey and Jess, and I was like, "Guys, like let's make this better." And they were pretty straight up like, "You need to be better at this." And so I worked to learn the Adobe suite to some extent, and just kind of piece it together. And like, I I would never say this to Joey to his face, but I learned like so much more from that class than I originally anticipated. Just in terms of like how stressful it all really is and how rewarding it is at the end, and how you can do things like one week talk about sports and not have a teleprompter working, or the next week talk about weather and not have your graphics working. And then all of a sudden, like one day in January, I'm sitting on a dinosaur in this dinosaur exhibit, like flea market thing in the middle of Eugene. And it's like, okay, this is like kind of fun, even though this is what people would traditionally be like, okay, this is like a more news focused broadcast, like talking about what's going on in the community. I was like, I like this. And, that kind of helped me figure out maybe play by play broadcasting isn't exactly what I need to be doing full time as much as I love it. Like I can venture out. And I just think the SOGC as a whole made me such a better overall journalist.
Awesome, yeah. And looking at your kind of work with KWVA, you worked up to leading the sports program. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you did and how you got to the director position?
I love KWVA so much. I mean, it's like I think a lot of times people talk about like their baby and like starting something and being like, this is my baby, like I'll never let it go. But like leaving the station in June 2025 was actually so incredibly hard. So yeah, I started on, literally day one of my college experience, and I was like, this is what I need to do. I was welcomed in early on. The three directors at the time, Sean McPherson, Ryan Milano, and Justin Grossweiner, who are all doing really cool things right now. They were great. And then I I was so unbelievably annoying at the start. And like in a good way, but at least I think. But like I knew I have to do everything. I have to say yes to everything. And so it got to a point where, I was saying yes to everything on campus. And so I was like in an a cappella group and trying to like look into like club baseball and also wanting to be full time at the radio station. And I had to kind of pull back from everything else to be able to say yes to everything at KWVA. And there was a point my freshman year where there was a big COVID spike and around campus. And so people kind of stopped doing things a little more. And I was like, this is my chance. Like I took every single coverage event, like we traveled up Knight and I traveled up to Portland one day to cover a women's basketball game, and it was just us in media row, and it was so cool. I was like, this is so cool. It was stuff like that where I would just say yes to everything that I got offered. My first ever broadcast was early November of 2021. It was an Oregon softball broadcast, and I was on color commentary, which is, like they always talk about a broadcast when they're talking about play by play versus colors. Like the play by play is the person painting the picture or like drawing the outline to the picture, and the color commentator is the one coloring it in, right? And so the play by play is saying what is happening, and the color is saying like why it's happening or giving more context to the picture. And so I did color for softball. It was a fall game, and it was the day I remember very vividly on my walk from Lillis to Jane Sanders Stadium. I got a text that Buster Posey had retired, and the Giants had just had like an unbelievable season that year, and so I was devastated, and I knew that was the end. And it was the day that my sister got dumped. And so it was like back to back in 10 minutes. I was like, well, how am I going to recover and call Oregon softball fall ball after this? And the point of like a fall ball scrimmage is not to actually play softball. It's like we're gonna get through 7 innings and then just keep going. And sometimes we'll start an inning with one out, and sometimes people will back to back times. It was so weird. My scorebook was like just completely mush by the end. It was like illegible. Like it was so bad. But then, that started my like, okay, I need to do everything. I love this. That really confirmed not only do I think this is what I want to do, like I know this is what I want to do because there's such a big adrenaline rush. And so then I got to call some like Thurston high school football, which was really cool. And then one day we were traveling to Thurston, myself and Knight, and when we were there, there's like there's like two levels to the broadcast booth, and I put that in like heavy air quotes, but there's an upper level and a lower level. And Knight was sitting on the lower level, and he kind of just pointed to the upper part, and he was like, "You're calling this game," and I was like, "Absolutely not." I was not ready, and he was like, "Get out a recorder and record, and I'm gonna give you critiques after the game." So I did that. It is awful. I went back and listened to it a couple weeks ago. And then I played it for my girlfriend recently, and it was like we just like laughed the entire time. It's so bad. But then there's still some points in it when you're like, okay, maybe there's something there, which was really cool. And I remember like listening to it back the first time and being like, this is horrific. This is really, really bad. But then I'd say something and I'd be like, okay, that's not that bad. But overall, like it pushed me to keep going, but it was awful. It's called Uh-Oh in my phone. Yeah. So then after that, I got to call Oregon lacrosse as my the first sport that I was like the voice of, which was really cool. It was myself and Jacob Salau, who's now working in Bend at a news station there. and I had to learn a new sport kind of right off the rip because I had never played or watched lacrosse before, but it was cool. It was really cool. I got to know that team. It was like the first time I got to put like voice of Oregon women's lacrosse in my Instagram bio, and that was really fun. And then after that, it was just kind of, that was it from there. Myself and Ryan Milano traveled to Fayetteville, Arkansas at the end of that year to call Oregon softball in the regionals against Arkansas, which was one of the best teams in the nation that year. And then over the next 3 years, it was just like constant work. It was so much fun. But overall, the way we grew the station was unbelievable. Where we started and there were only 12 people, and I kind of had it easy to grow up the ranks because there really weren't that many people in the station. And when I finished, we had to move through like new tiers of people in the station where it wasn't just leadership and volunteers, it was leadership. And then we had like a designated staff that had their responsibilities. And then the volunteers after that, which were kind of just learning the ropes of the station. And so we went from 12 people when I got in to over 50 when I graduated, which I'm so incredibly proud of because it's not just like we're throwing out people that aren't talented or don't have good work ethic. It's people that really care and want to be there. And we're still seeing it now where the leadership team is basically as big as the station was when I got in. We opened up to where we're more than just a radio station now. When I got in, one of the big mantras was like, we are the radio station, and that's great. And it was. But with our agreement with Big Ten Network and Big Ten Student U, we're able to call games on Big Ten Plus. We appeal to more than just play-by-play and color broadcasters. We've added sideline, we've added writers, we've added graphic design people, photographers, videographers. There's so much at the station. And so I'm so incredibly grateful for my time there.
And another cool part of KWVA was all the traveling you were able to do for it. What are some highlights from the places you've traveled to and then broadcast from?
There were so many cool ones, but the first big, I traveled to Utah for my first real road trip, which was really cool. It was about a year after I'd gone for the first time, and Utah, I think sometimes gets a bad rap. I really it's gorgeous. It was so incredibly beautiful. That was just cool because it was the first one. And then later that year, I got to go to Stanford and call games at Stanford's old softball stadium. They just renovated, but that was really cool because I grew up going to Stanford games. And then Fayetteville at the end of the year was like the best collegiate sports environment I've ever been in, where we were 3 hours before the game, and the line for this game was all the way back out behind home plate, around the stadium, all the way around and out past the left field grass. And it was just really cool to see. My first road trip my sophomore year, I went to Cal, and I got to travel with Jacob, who I called lacrosse with, and Levi Bergthold, who is to this day one of my best friends, and Charlie Martindale, who's also one of my best friends. And Charlie lives in Berkeley, so we got to drop him off there. But then me, Jacob, and Levi finished the drive out to my house in San Jose, and we got to see my family. And then we got to call the game in like this old broken down stadium, and it was so gross, but it was so cool. Again, it's like this is why we do it. This is what it's all about. So then I went to Vegas twice in about a 5 month span. First time was for the last ever Pac-12 football championship game. Cool experience, but the game sucked because Oregon lost to Washington. And that we were so convinced, everyone in the world, it felt like, was so convinced that Oregon was the better team. And then we lost, and it wasn't really close. The score was close, but it really wasn't that close. But then about 4 months later, I went back and I got to go and call the last ever Pac-12 women's basketball tournament with Saul Galvan, who is now the head director at KWVA. And I love that guy. He's one of my best friends. I have full, like, I'm so excited for what he's done this year and what he's about to continue doing. And that was really difficult. I want to say it was like 10 games in 4 days, 10 games in 5 days, something like that. It was 3 games each of the first 2 days, and then just game after that. We got to be there for a week, which was really cool. But then this past year, 2024-25, I got to call Oregon football, which I'm so incredibly lucky for. And they were the number one team in the nation for a majority of the year. But I got to go to Wisconsin, which was great because I got to see my family, who I hadn't seen in over a decade, and that was really emotional. I went to the Rose Bowl, obviously, to call that game. We went to Indianapolis for the Big Ten championship, but I think my favorite one was going to Michigan. Because it's the big house. It's such an iconic stadium, and Ann Arbor's so cool. And I've always kind of like fangirled from afar about Michigan. But I got to stay with one of my old friends from theater, which is always like a weird mix, generally bringing in anyone from two different friend groups. But the just like generally being there with Saul, who knows me very much as like my sports persona. Not that they're different people, but just it's that you talk to everyone a little bit different. And it was in this big old rundown house with like seven theater kids at Michigan. And so it was me and Saul at this Halloween party. And I will never forget the look on his face when Femininomenon came on in the basement of this old theater house in Michigan. It was so gross down there, but like the music was exactly that. It was Chaperone, and and it's so old down there, and he looked so unbelievably confused. But that was awesome. And then I got to call a game at Stanford for women's basketball a couple of years ago. I got to travel a bunch for softball. And then this last season, I got to call Oregon baseball to kind of round out my time. And that was unbelievable. It was, I mean, seriously life changing, just getting to see people that I had broadcast in some capacity before, but also it's my favorite sport. And it was so unbelievably cool.
And during that same period, you also had a repeating summer internship with Walnut Creek Crawdads. What did you do there, and what did you take away from that experience?
Yeah, so I referred to KWVA as my baby. And I think when I think of the Crawdads, they're like my significantly cooler twin of KWVA that I like pay more attention to. And the like classic like older sibling. But the Crawdads are a summer baseball team in the Bay Area, about an hour from where I live. And we have players from all over the country. I got to see a bunch of really cool Division 1 talent just over the summer. It's college wood bat summer baseball is a big deal, just kind of all over the place because there isn't a ton of college baseball in the summer, obviously. Um, and so I actually found out about the internship through Knight and Ryan, who I've mentioned already, because they had worked for a team in the same league before the summer before, and I was like, cool, like let's do this. But I started there, and on day one, it was very clear that I had a little more on my plate than I had originally anticipated. Where I went in thinking, all right, I'm gonna broadcast. We have this 10-person intern team, and everyone's gonna work harmoniously, and it's gonna be beautiful and perfect. Then I get in day one, and it's like just so not that. And so it was me and this other broadcaster named Alon, and then our assistant general manager's name was Daniel. Our head GM just didn't really talk to anyone throughout the entire summer. So we were kind of left like to our own devices a little bit. And it was difficult. But that's when I was like, all right, I think I can do things that aren't just broadcast. And so I took on some stuff like writing game recaps, writing and working on feature stories about players, talking to players to get more information on the broadcast. It was the first time where I really had my own canvas. That's exactly what it is. It's a blank canvas, and you can go do to some extent whatever you want and learn. And I think that's one of the best things about a good internship is you're given a space to learn, especially like if the first year I was there was unpaid. And I think for any unpaid internship, there has to be some give and take between the management staff and the employee, because so often it's like, I expect you to be perfect. And it's like, okay, you're also expecting me to drive an hour here and not giving me any guidance. And so I was so lucky to get the Crawdads because our owner and manager of the team, Brant Cummings, who I think so incredibly highly of, he basically told me, like, whatever you want to do, do it. If I don't like it, I'll tell you, but I will tell you how to make it better. And he gave me that free reign, and it was great. And then after that first summer, Brant called me at the end and he was like, all right, so what do I have to do to get you back? And I said, first, pay me. And second, I want to help hire interns, and I want to do sponsorship money because coach pays for all of this out of pocket, and it's not cheap to run a baseball team, when you have to pay for. So I wanted to take some of that off his plate a little bit. And he was like, all right, you got it. And so that entire off season, I worked on hiring interns. We hired 12 for the next summer. And that summer, I raised about $8,000 in sponsorship money, just cold calling people in the Bay. I got to help find players the year after that, which was super cool because I'm a stat nerd. And so I just went through like every college roster and started scouting players, which was super fun. And yeah, I love the Crawdads so much to the point where I had to take last summer off because we were in Japan and I was still watching Crawdads games like late at night on my phone to make sure that they were doing okay. And I'm back this summer in a little bit of a different capacity, but I think summer internships are so huge, especially if, like I said, you're given the canvas. And I'm so thankful that I had that opportunity there.
All right, so now you're post grad, you're still doing some work with the Walnut Creek Crawdads, and you're also working as a freelance broadcaster for Stanford University, Menlo College, and West Valley College. Can you give us a little insight into how you kind of got into that freelancing realm and how you're doing it?
Yeah, I think on the same level as I feel about good summer internships, I think freelance broadcasting is one of the best options in the world for people post grad, especially with the job market today, and especially with the amount of people that want to go into broadcasting and the small amount of full time broadcast jobs there are. I think it's huge to be able to have multiple options. So I started in my senior year in about January by reaching out to every non-power four Division I team, plus a bunch of the West Coast schools. But I got into Stanford and I had a connection at Cal, which was really cool. And then once that wave passed and I was like, okay, I still haven't found anything, your confidence starts getting chipped into a little bit. And so I was like, all right, we'll keep going. And I started emailing, I think it was every coastal Division II school. From there, it was every West Coast Division III school and NAIA school. And by the time I finished emails, I had like 200 to 250 emails sent. I had 15 responses and 4 were yes, Stanford, Menlo, San Jose State, and Santa Clara, which is nice because they were all right by my house. And so when you only hear back from such a small amount, it's discouraging. And I didn't deal with it particularly well. It affected my relationships with people, it affected my mental health. But I think the big thing for me was realizing I looked too much into like the 100th percentile outcome, which was perfection. What you're not seeing is the other 99. That is the vast majority of people. And so what I had to realize at some point is a 99th percentile outcome is still an elite outcome. An 85th percentile outcome is still an elite outcome. And so the fact that I have Stanford, which is obviously an incredible school, I had a couple other D1s and then I was working on some D2s and I was like, this is a good outcome. And then from there, I still was worried. So I was like, all right, I'm going to email every junior college in the area. So I did that. And a couple hours later, I heard back from West Valley College and I'm basically full time there now. It's the most fun I've ever had working. It's also the most I've ever worked. And I'm also doing very different things than I was in undergrad, where I'm doing more communications, more journalism, more sports information stuff. It's everything that I've ever wanted in a job where I am close to home. I am working in sports and I'm working with such unique stories right now at the junior college level. And yeah, I would say back to the main point, freelancing is such a good option, but generally be annoying. Like people are so worried about their image, and I completely understand that, and I am too. But be that person that is relentless in trying to get a job. And if someone says no, you're going to want to turn it down. But if there's even an inkling of an opening, keep pushing for it.
Amazing. So, at the end of these episodes, we like to ask our guests to share one cool story, whether it's a unique experience that you've had during your work, an interesting project you've been on, or just something that most people don't know about you. Uh, so, take it away and tell us your one cool story.
So I grew up not really liking football. And then when I realized I was going to Oregon, I was like, okay, I should probably start watching football. And so the first Oregon game I really watched was Oregon Ohio State in 2021, right before my freshman year. I had no idea what was going on. I was just like, cool, Oregon's beating Ohio State. But that kind of planted in my mind that Oregon was really good. And we realized my sophomore year that we were going to split football play-by-play duties for the station, and that I was going to get to call this first game of the year in Atlanta. I was the new assistant director at the time. It was going to be myself and Levi. And so we show up to Atlanta and we got in, we got in at like probably about 11:30, and we're like, let's go to Waffle House. I really want to go to Waffle House because neither of us had ever been. And obviously like we'd heard about Waffle House. We were on TikTok, whatever. And so we show up to this Waffle House, and it's exactly what you picture a Waffle House in downtown Atlanta to look like at 1 a.m. You know, like the windows are fogged up. Everyone can tell that you're not from there. And so, like, me and Levi are just kind of standing there like, hey, how's it going? We order our food and we sit down at a booth, and like 30 minutes pass. And we just keep getting looked at. It was awkward. Like something felt weird. So then about 15 more minutes pass and we see like someone in a police uniform walk in, and Levi immediately was like, Austin, we have to go. And I was like, dude, what are you talking about? Like we haven't even gotten our food yet. He's like, Austin, we have to go. I'll tell you later. So we like run up to the counter and we're like, hey, is our food ready? And they were like, oh yeah, it's been ready for 45 minutes. Here it is. So we like scramble out, and Levi's clearly panicking. And I was like, dude, what happened? He was like, that person in uniform like didn't have a badge, didn't have any real identification, but I think I saw like a gun on their belt loop. And so I was like, okay, cool. So we don't really know, but he was very clearly freaked out about that. And that kind of set the tone for the rest of our weekend, where it was just like we were very on edge after this 2 a.m., waiting 45 minutes to get no Waffle House experience. So then the next day we're in Atlanta and we're walking to the game, and we go to get brunch at this like Southern restaurant, and we go to walk in and they like magic wand us down in front. And Levi's like, dude, this is so weird. So we ended up not going, but it was just, again, that whole like, this is so different than Eugene, Oregon, than going to an Oregon game.
Yeah.
But then we walk in and it's at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, which is where the Atlanta Falcons play. And it's just so beautiful. Like there are times I think in your career where you really step back and you're like, okay, this is it. And both me and Levi had that moment where, not to like call Levi out on this, but like we both started like tearing up in there. And it was so emotional because it felt like this is where we're supposed to be. And after the crazy night and a half that we had before, it was like, this is so cool. Yeah, that was one of the best days of my life, one of the best trips of my life. Yeah, that's my one cool story.
And that is a crazy one cool story to share. I'll say that. That is a wild tale from start to end.
Yeah, I hope it ended up okay, because I know the start was a little up and down.
Yeah, but no. I mean, like that's how I feel. I mean, I feel like it was probably up and down for you as well.
Yeah, and we're all safe, so it doesn't matter.
That's the highlight.
Yeah.
That's the highlight. We're all safe, and you were able to get to the game. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing that awesome story with us.
Thank you so much, Ethan. This was so much fun. Thanks, I really appreciate it.
That is one roller coaster of a story. Hey, thanks for listening to another episode of One Cool Story, Tales from the University of Oregon School of Journalism and Communication. We hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to hear more, find us wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. To stay up to date on what's happening at the SOJC, follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, or Blue Sky at UOSOJC. From Allen Hall, I'm Julia Bobach. See you next time.